Breaking news this morning, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency says North Korea has no intention of giving up its nuclear program right now. That despite President Trump's repeated claims that the threat from North Korea's nuclear weapons is now over. CNN's Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr is joining me right now with more details on this. So, Barbara, make sense of this for me. What is the DIA saying?
Well, the Defense Intelligence Agency here at the Pentagon, they're well aware of what the president has said. And remember, Mr. Trump has said he would sit down with Kim and know right away what his intentions were and if he was really going to denuclearize. Well, maybe not so fast. According to DIA and the intelligence they have, is that Kim has no intention of doing that, at least not right now. That he may well sign some sort of agreement with the U.S., but that the imagery that they have, the intelligence they have, the electronic intercepts, is indicating that Kim plans for now to try and deceive the U.S., to try and hide away his missiles, his warheads. And this is what he's done for years. So for the DIA, not a big surprise. The White House still very much holding to an optimistic view. Listen for a minute to John Bolton and what he had to say over the weekend.
We have developed a program. I'm sure that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will be discussing this with the North Koreans in the near future about really how to dismantle all of their WMD and ballistic missile programs in a year. If they have the strategic decision already made to do that and they're cooperative, we can move very quickly.
If they have the strategic decision made to do that, well, the Trump administration has been saying ever since the Singapore summit, all is well, the North Koreans are going to denuclearize. But again, not so fast. It's been Defense Secretary James Mattis, I would say, that's been one of the voices of caution. He has said publicly he hasn't seen any signs of them doing it yet. Kate?
Barbara, thank you so much. Joining me now to discuss this, Democratic Congressman David Cicilline of Rhode Island. He sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure. Good morning.
So with what you hear Barbara Starr reporting, does this mean that what was discussed and agreed to, they say, in Singapore is now just completely dead?
Well, I think this is an example of the kind of what happens when you don't actually have a strategy. The president sort of has been kind of doing this reality show diplomacy, kind of a lot of theater, lots of pictures, lots of handshakes. But the truth is, there was no agreement to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. The president said, the threat of the nuclear North Korea is over, was very premature. We obviously were hopeful that these talks would produce the outlines of some agreement. But the North Koreans have a very long history of doing this, making promises that they're going to meet international demands to dismantle their nuclear program. All the while they're engaging in those discussions, they're speeding up the program, which is exactly what our intelligence community is now reporting. So this is just, I think, an important lesson that this is a serious issue which requires lots of careful thinking, lots of preparation, lots of oversight, and this idea of like sitting down and being able to tell in the first 30 seconds what he's going to do might work for a television show. It doesn't work for real life. And this is a real threat, and it's a serious challenge for the United States and much of the world. And it's clearly not been resolved despite the president's very optimistic presentation.
But I am curious. I mean, Mike Pompeo could not have been more clear going into all of this, right? Complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. I mean, they even came up with an acronym for it. They were so serious about repeating it over and over. So has Singapore changed anything?
Well, I mean, you try to look for something positive that came out of it. I mean, what it did for Kim Jong-un, sadly, is it elevated him. It brought him onto the international stage. There's even some reporting that the president's contemplating inviting him to New York. I mean, this is the most brutal dictator probably on the planet right now, who's murdered his own people, murdered his own family, starved his own people. And the idea that the president has called him an honorable man and elevated him and praised his leadership of the country, which isn't leadership at all. It's a dictatorship, a brutal dictatorship. So the one thing that's been accomplished from the North Koreans' perspective is he's elevated Kim Jong-un. He's elevated the regime, given them sort of standing on the world stage. Having a meeting with the president of the United States is something he, his grandfather, his father all sought and didn't get. So right. I think that's been really the outcome of it. But what we were all hoping was the beginning of some dialogue that would ultimately resolve this. But it just shows that you can't.
Do you think the dialogue is still open, though? Do you think the dialogue is still open, or do you think this closes a dialogue if they now all signs are pointing to they're doing the same thing that they've always done?
Well, I mean, I think we have to engage in diplomacy in this regard, but we have to be sure that they make specific commitments, that those commitments are verifiable, that we hold them to it. We can't sort of just accept it on Mr. Trump's sort of impression of Kim Jong-un, and I think that's the mistake they've made.